The Voluntary Guidelines for Securing Sustainable Small-Scale Fisheries (SSF Guidelines) in the context of food security and poverty eradication is the first internationally agreed instrument dedicated entirely to the immense importance, but until now, often neglected small-scale fisheries sector. The guidelines support responsible fisheries and sustainable social and economic development for the benefit of current and future generations, with emphasis on small-scale fishers and fish workers and related activities, and including vulnerable and marginalized people, promoting a human rights-based approach. SSF guidelines look beyond fisheries into gender issues, human rights, social development, climate change, among others, which are key issues for quality livelihoods for small-scale fishers. With the support of Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations and GIZ Responsible Fisheries Business Chain Project, Katosi Women Development Trust has carried out trainings on the voluntary guidelines for securing sustainable small-scale fisheries in the major districts of Lake Victoria of Buikwe, Kalangala, Wakiso, Mukono, Buvuma, Bujiri, Busia, Jinja, Kalungu, Kampala, Masaka, Mayuge, Mpiji, Namayingo, and Rakai. These covered a total of 80 women grassroots women leaders and 1,900 small-scale fishers. As a result of the trainings, fisher folks have been empowered to understand their obligation towards the sustainability of the fisheries resources and their rights as resource users to ensure collective sustainable management of the resource. The trainings have also helped to recognize the need for a collective responsibility from the Government of Uganda, CSOs, and key sector players if effective implementation is to be achieved. Uganda is richly endowed with natural resources that are responsible for fish production. These include the 5 major lakes: Victoria, Albert, Kyoga, George, Edward, and 160 minor lakes, rivers, and wetlands with good fish species diversity that supports livelihoods, provides employment, and value nutrition to combat hunger and malnutrition, specifically in children. Both land-based and lake-based cage aquaculture production systems being practiced with a number of emerging commercial farms on Lake Victoria producing tilapia species. Fish is usually preserved by smoking or refrigeration. Accordingly, the guidelines are intended to support the visibility, recognition, and enhancement of the already important role of small-scale fisheries and to contribute to global and national efforts towards the eradication of hunger and poverty. The fisheries subsector in Uganda contributes about 3% to national gross domestic product, GDP, and 12% to agricultural GDP. It is also important to note that about 3.2 million people depend on fisheries as main source of their livelihoods, while 60% of people depending on small-scale fisheries in Uganda are women, majority of whom are in the post-harvest segment.
Erinnya Kaye Emmanuel, ndi musajja muvubi. Ebirungi byenfunye mu kuvuba zimbimu akayumba.
I've learned that if I start smoking fish and preserving it, then I take to various markets, I can be able to earn more incomes.
Amanya gange nze Nalongo Farida, ndi mutunzi wa byennyanja bikalu. Omulimu guno ngufunyeemu ebirungi bingi, nsobodde omudaala gwendiko okugugula.
Nsobodde okuweerera abaana bange, pangisaako enju ne bwenkolera. Ndaataasa ku record pin, ndaabona esente kyabahozi, ndaabona income yiholeremu, ndaabona loss yiholesina yifuniremu.
Kulwanyisa obwavu mu kitundu, abali mu kuvuba beewola ku ssente mu bbanka ne batandika okuteekawo envuba eyeetaagibwa mu mateeka. Basiba amaato agatuukanye n'omulembe n'okugula obutimba n'amalobo agakwatagana ne gavumenti geeyagala. Ebizibu bye tusanze ku mwalo kuno bitusoomooza ennyo. Amaato amanene ga ssente nnyingi. Bw'oteekako yingini nayo ya ssente nnyingi, ate n'obutimba bwa ssente nnyingi.
Mafuta galinnya nnyo. Ebyennyanja ne bibeera bitono kuba envuba embi eri mu mazzi.
Twetaaga ekyuma ekikalirira kubanga we tukalirira wafunda tewamala byennyanja, tuba n'ebyennyanja bingi.
Destruction of our gazetted fish handling facility due to flooding of Lake Victoria.
aye okusinziira ku kutendekebwa tusobwere okukumakuma ku bavubi n'okwekolamu ebibiina n'okuboneka nti tusobola okufuula obuvubi okufuuka bizinesi.
Mu musomo guno ndabye nti abantu bange kye bagenda okuyambibwamu kwe kumanya nti omukyala naye alina okubeera n'eddembe lye okukola omulimu kyenkanye n'omusajja.
Nze kyenja okutamu nkola kyakukuma bizinesi yange baidukulu bange bajaganewo kuba ndi muno obumanirivu buti ndidi nti waliwo esente ed'obuntu wabaawo sente da bizinesi.
Tugenda kutwala mu maaso ekibiina kyaffe ebibadde biganyeemu tubitwale mu maaso. Tujja kusobola okuyambibwako ebibiina ng'ebiri waggulu ga GIZ.
Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO, has come up with a guideline for managing the small-scale fisheries globally. The Voluntary Guidelines for securing sustainable small-scale fisheries is being adopted by a number of countries, including Uganda. In Uganda, we have so far come up with a way of adapting this and making it understood by the community who are affected. The objective of these guidelines is to enhance the contribution and make everybody aware, including those who allocate resources for the management. We also need to contribute to the equitable management. No one should be left behind. And the other thing that we are looking at is enhance public awareness. Don't only depend on scientific knowledge, but also the cultural knowledge for the people who are using these resources. We think this should be done in a gender equitable way, involving those who are supposed to benefit, especially the women. We also think human rights approach should not be left behind, it should be part of the guideline. Other issues that are coming up like climate change and social protection of the resource users. Being a global approach, we are implementing sustainable small-scale guidelines on all the water bodies in the country. As a start, we have had some trainings already ongoing on Lake Victoria and parts of Lake Albert. But this has been not only by FAO, but using other partners that we work with on the ground. And this has been very successful as people are getting to understand what the principles are all about.
So far we have trained over 650 women, and we are empowering them with knowledge that is going to enable them to continue to engage in fisheries, but also is going to empower them on key decisions they have to take as individuals so as to sustain fisheries. In most of the fishing communities, we have been in training on the SSF guidelines. They have always told us that we have two types of fishing. We have the legal fishing and we have the illegal fishing. After the training, we engage the communities to commit to move from illegal fishing practices to legal fishing practices. And the beauty with our organization is that we also have the facilitative role, particularly for women in groups, to support them to acquire the resources and also the skills they need to be able to move from illegal fishing activities to legal fishing. We support the women groups to acquire fishing boats, like the one we've seen in Mbale. We support them to access microfinance, but we also train them. And with this training, with funding from GIZ, we also have business development services training. The trainings are empowering them to run their fisheries businesses, even though they are micro businesses, as enterprises, not as a hobby. So I'm very happy when I talk to the women and they tell me that they've learned a lot of skills on how to handle their businesses, to separate in business money and individual money. And after having all that training, and then we come in with the training on SSF guidelines, then it brings the person to understand the whole concept, the environment they're also working in, and also their responsibilities on what they do so as to sustain fisheries.
Uganda is now developing a national plan of action to implement the SSF guidelines. And therefore, we call upon the general public, including fishermen, traders, and consumers, to support this program. SSF guidelines if well implemented, can help to achieve sustainable development targets on access of small-scale fishers to resources and markets.